Hi, everybody. Welcome to our School Medicaid Lunch and Hour from cold and rainy Arizona. And I can't say that often. Today, we have a special lunch and hour on the OIG Special Audit Report that was recently released, focused on the random moment time study. I'm Bob Bundy, your presenter. Here's my contact information while I cover our ground rules for today's lunch and hour. First, we try and target our lunch and hours at 30 minutes. This one, because it's special, is going to be a little bit longer. It's about 40 minutes, no matter how much I edited and timed it. Second, we don't talk about anything state specific on the lunch and hours. Now, a little bit about our lunch and hour series. Most of you know we try and give at least one school Medicaid lunch and hour every month of the school year. All the lunch and hours we give are designed to present information on a single topic that we think folks in school Medicaid should know about. So if you're interested in future lunch and hours, you can go out to the website, go to the events tab, read the description, and register just like you registered for today's session. So in December, OIG released this special school Medicaid audit report specifically focused on the random moment time study. And so today I have some objectives for this session. First, I want to spend a little bit of time right up front to give you guys a little bit of background. What is OIG? What do they do? What is a random moment time study? Some people just don't know. And how does it affect school Medicaid? Basically, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Then I'm going to hit the highlights of the special audit report. I'm definitely not going to go through every single finding or every single detail, but I am going to give you an idea of some of the things that they found, what they recommended, what OIG recommended to CMS, what CMS's response to that was, and how that might affect folks out in the field at the school district level, at the state Medicaid agency level. All right, so let me get going. First, I want to make sure we're all on the same page. What is OIG? Well, here's a diagram, a real high-level diagram of part of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS. HHS is a cabinet-level department. Its secretary is Alex Azar. He is in the presidential line of succession because he's a cabinet official and that sort of thing. Down at the bottom are some agencies you've probably heard of that are administered by HHS. And over on the right is CMS. CMS is responsible for the administration of all Medicaid programs, including school Medicaid. So right in the middle of our diagram is the Office of Inspector General, or OIG. And sometimes you'll hear it referred to as just IG, the Inspector General. And here's the deal. HHS is responsible for spending billions of dollars of public money. They've got lots of programs to implement. They have tons of regulations that they have to follow, and they do the best job they can to meet all those requirements. OIG is an internal watchdog, I guess I'd say, that is designed to make sure that they're doing things the right way. So they check and make sure the regulations are being followed, and they make sure that the money is being spent correctly. And one of their duties is to perform audits. And they perform audits for all of these different agencies. Now, one thing, every department, every cabinet level department has its own OIG. So we're looking at the OIG in Health and Human Services, but there's a separate OIG office at the Department of Justice, and one at the Department of Labor, and one at the Agriculture Department, that kind of stuff. This OIG only looks at what's going on in the programs under the HHS umbrella. All right. Now, OIG has the responsibility of auditing school Medicaid programs, and they do that on a pretty regular basis. Typically, when they do a school Medicaid audit, they're doing it at a state level. So OIG will look at the school Medicaid program in Montana, for example, or Kentucky or something like that. They do a big audit. They may be looking for something very specific, or they may be just doing a routine kind of audit of the program to make sure that everything's in line. Sometimes they do several of those in a year. Sometimes they do one or none. As a matter of fact, in 2018, the only school Medicaid audit that OIG published was this special audit that they published right at the end of the year in December. Now, all of their audit reports are publicly available. You can go out to their website, Department of HHS, the OIG, and find all their audit reports. You can read all of them too, and they're actually kind of an interesting read. The only issue with their website is that all of their audit reports are on the same place, not just school Medicaid, but all their Medicaid audits, hospitals and pharmaceutical audits and all that stuff. So if you go out to their website and you're looking for school Medicaid audits, you might have to hunt around a little bit. A tip is, if you want to go out and do this, search for the word school in the web page, and you're more than likely to find what you're looking for. Now, if you want specific audit reports for school Medicaid, you can go out to our website, because we've pulled up all the links, or found all the links on that CMS website. It's on our school Medicaid news menu, and you'll see a list of audits, and we have them in chronological order, and we also list in parentheses which state they were covering. So if you're interested, you can go out there and find those. One other note: when we find audit reports that it might be local audits, not an OIG audit, but maybe it's a state audit auditing a local school district or something, we will put those links out here too. But generally speaking, most of the audits that are listed on this page are links to the OIG audits. Okay, let's talk about the random moment time study. That kind of tells you a little bit about OIG. When a state Medicaid agency has a school Medicaid program, they have to come up with the methodology, or how they're going to reimburse the school districts. They have to explain all that to CMS. The random moment time study is one component of a complete methodology. So it's not the complete methodology by itself, but it is one component. And it is used in both administrative claiming and school-based health services, or kind of the special ed Medicaid that people talk about, speech therapy, physical therapy. It's used in both around the country. It's generally used across the country for the administrative claiming, and I would guess probably about half the states use it on the school-based health services. So let me give you a real quick high-level example. In the OIG audit report, they actually give a quick example too. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we have a school therapist, and she provides direct medical services to students. As part of our methodology, we need to figure out how much of her time is spent providing direct services. Remember, Medicaid is not going to reimburse a school district for lunchtime, or for travel time, or for meetings, or prep, or anything like that. They're only going to reimburse for direct services time. So we have to kind of figure out how much time providers spend providing direct service. So using the random moment time, or the RMTS, random moment time study methodology, randomly, this provider could receive an email. She could receive an email every once in a while. She might not receive an email at all. It's completely random. And that email is going to say, Leslie, what were you doing at 2:17 yesterday? And Leslie's going to read that, and she's going to go to a field, and she's going to type in what she was doing. And maybe she says, I was in my car headed to the junior high school for some speech therapy sessions. She's going to reply to that email, and that email is going to go back to a central location. Somebody there is going to read what Leslie wrote, and they are going to interpret it and make a determination. Was she providing a covered service, a covered medical service, at 2:17? They're going to read exactly what she wrote, and they're going to say yes or no. Now, that's how the email portion of random moment time studies work. Some states don't use email, but this is a pretty typical implementation. Now, how many emails do we have to send out? If we just send one to Leslie, or if we send none to Leslie, we'll never know. So how many emails do we have to send out? Well, let's take a look at that and figure out kind of how they figure this out. We have Leslie. She's got a contract for 180 days for this school year. The time during the school day then she could see students is 7 hours, let's say 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. Again, just kind of round numbers for the examples here. 60 minutes. There are 75,600 possible moments during the day that we could ask Leslie what she's doing to kind of figure out how much time she spends with students. But Leslie's not the only provider in our school district. So if we have 10 providers, we go from 75,000 minutes to 750,000 potential minutes that we could ask people, what are you doing? But again, we're not the only school district in this state. There are tons of school districts in the state. So, you do the math, and of course, now we have a potential for thousands of providers out there and millions of different individual moments that we could ask them, what are you doing? But how are we going to figure that out as a state Medicaid agency? We could send one email to every provider every minute of every day. That's not feasible. But using what I call some nerdy statistics, that's a technical term, you can look that up. The state will figure out, the state Medicaid agency will figure out how many emails they need to send out to get a solid enough number to include in their methodology. And you guys have seen this when you see a poll on TV, they'll put it up on the TV on the news and they'll say, we took a poll and 58% of Americans who were polled said this. And down at the bottom in little dinky print, it will say something like this survey has a 3% margin of error. That means that they asked enough people to get within 6 points statistically of what the real answer is, and they landed at 58%. But the real answer would be somewhere between 55% and 61%. That's what that margin of error means. So the state Medicaid agency uses those same kind of nerdy statistics, and they figure out, well, what is our margin of error? Because the only way you're ever going to get something exact is, again, if you ask every provider every minute of every day what they're doing. Not going to be able to do that. So CMS probably has a guideline. I've never worked in a state Medicaid agency, so I don't know, but they might say to a state, you guys come up with your random moment time study methodology and you have to have a 2% margin of error. So using all those nerdy statistics, the Medicaid agency will figure out, okay, based on this many providers and this many minutes in the day and all this kind of stuff, we need to send out 7,100 emails to land within that 2% margin of error. And again, I'm just throwing out examples to illustrate the point. That's how they're going to do that. Now, if the CMS said 2% margin of error is too loose, we're going to make you go to 1% margin of error. That would mean that they're probably going to have to go out and survey a whole lot more people than just 7,100 emails. Now, a couple other terms in the RMTS to talk about just real quick because it comes up in the audit. First one is the universe. What is the universe that you're surveying? And again, if you think about that in a state where we're doing the RMTS at the state level, that's all the rosters. And every school district, every quarter probably has to turn in a roster to the state. And they say, these are the 27 providers that are part of our random moment time study pool here at our school district. And all the school districts do that. They probably also turn in the list of days that they're actually in school, because it could be that you have teacher days or classroom days that or teacher prep days where the students are not there. So obviously there'll be no services those days. And that could be different from school district to school district. The other thing is that the state has to identify their valid sample. So remember, I told you they have to come up with their nerdy statistics to figure out that they have to send 7,100 emails. They have to be able to prove to CMS how they got that. And if you guys have ever seen any basic statistics, this just blows them away. The statistics that they use to figure this stuff out is amazing. Not anywhere close to the statistics stuff that I had when I was in college. The last thing is a couple parts of the methodology. One, it has to be random. Nobody should be able to predict when they're going to get an email or who will get an email. And it needs to be randomly distributed. That means that not all the emails should go out on Mondays, and not all the emails should arrive at speech therapist inboxes, and not all the emails should go out in February. They need to be randomly distributed, and February may have more emails than any other state, but as long as it's statistically valid and it just happened that way, that's okay. All right, so a little bit about OIG, a little bit about RMTS. What does this whole RMTS get us? It gets us this number, or whatever the number is in your state. Again, this is just an illustration. We get all these emails in, we read all the responses from what were you doing yesterday at such and such a time, and we make the determination based on all these statistics that our providers are providing direct service 60% of the time. Okay, and again, it's different in every state, and it's different probably every quarter of every state. That means 40% of the time our providers are not providing direct service. They're at lunch, or they're in meetings, or they're in a training or something like that. 60%. Now we're going to use that number in our reimbursement methodology. And remember, I said the RMTS is just one component. So there are lots of other components, but this audit from OIG was specifically focused on the RMTS and kind of that example I just went through with you guys. So let me go through real quick the audit. The audit was released in 2018, so just a couple of months ago. It's a special audit, and it's a special audit because OIG actually did not go back out and audit records again. They were looking at existing audits that they had already done, and they had noticed there's a problem, a consistent problem with the random moment time study. So they reviewed existing audits. They did do a little bit of reclassification and did some numbers, and they talk about it in their report, but they didn't go back out to states. They caught that there's an issue, and this issue just keeps coming up. Now, anybody who has read the OIG audits over the last 5 or 6 years, you might have noticed this trend. I've had many discussions with people who read these, and whenever a new one comes out, we all kind of thumb through it and see, is there a problem with the random moment time study? And son of a gun, there is, and there has been. So here are the audits that they reviewed. These are audits that they have already conducted. I have them listed chronologically by the year the report came out. Okay, that doesn't mean that's the year of the data that they were reviewing. So for an audit report in 2012, they could have been reviewing data from 2008, for example, but the report came out in 2012. So I have the year, I have the state, and the amount of money OIG in that report or in that audit said needed to be repaid. And those amounts go from $400,000 to $220 million. That's a ton. Let me just point out real quickly, for those of you who've never read one of these, how OIG works. Here, and it's just a quick example. Maybe OIG does an audit and they say, we found a little problem in this one really basic calculation. However, that calculation is used throughout the reimbursement program to generate numbers for some reason. All the reimbursements are based on those numbers. So because that initial small calculation was wrong, CMS, it could be that all these numbers are wrong, and we recommend you get all your money back. And that's kind of how, when you read OIG's audit, that's kind of how some of them read. So it could be that they recommend to CMS that this state pay back $10 million. And it's really up to CMS to interpret whether or not they need to get all that money back, which they have done in the past, or maybe they need to sit down with the state and figure out what the details were and figure out if there's a way to figure out if any money should come back, if all the money should come back, or if the school districts actually got the money that they deserve. So it's really up to CMS to interpret that. Now, here's where things change a little bit. In this audit, this special audit, they also go back and they list the contract vendors who worked on the RMTS portion of each of those state audits back then. Okay. Now, back when they wrote these audits, 2014, 2013, whatever, they did not name the contractors, but they're making a very special point of doing it now. And that's a trend that we've seen in the last couple. So if you look at the table in Texas in 2017, in that audit report, they OIG named the vendor. They just named them. They didn't say anything good or bad about them. They just named the contractor. In the last one there from New Jersey, 2017, not only did they name the contractor, but they actually called them to task for some things that they did that affected the audit. Those, and again, I've talked to lots of people who've read these over the years. You do not see OIG name the contractors. I'm sure they have historically, but I can't think of one before those two in 2017 before where I actually remember seeing who the contractors were. They mentioned that there was a contractor, but they'll never call them out by name. Okay. In this special audit report, they named them all. Again, even if back in 2015, that original audit didn't name the contractor. They name them here. And that's something that I'll talk about a little bit at the end. All right, now I'm going to go through the findings. And these are just kind of general. I've got a couple of classifications. I've got a couple of specific examples. And then I'm going to tell you how OIG bundled these guys all up. There are tons of individual findings that they report from all these different audits, these over the 10 years or whatever it is. So obviously can't go through all of them, but they point out several big examples. And so I'll point out a few of them too, just so you guys get an idea. 2 out of the 10 states that they reviewed that had problems with RMTS had a sample universe that might not be accurate. It might be accurate, but it might not be accurate. We can't tell. And they can't tell because maybe the rosters are not there. So they don't really know if those are accurate universes or not. 3 out of 10 states had no medical record documentation for the moment. So remember, I'm a therapist. I get an email that says, Bob, what are you doing at 11:15 yesterday morning? And I type my answer. It goes back to the central location. Somebody codes it. They use all those answers to come up with their reimbursement. 3 years later, here comes OIG and they say, where are all those answers from people like Bob? And the state says, oh, we don't have them. We threw them away, or we discarded them, or we deleted them. They didn't have the documentation. 3 out of 10 states do not have, or did not have when they were audited, a valid RMTS plan. I'm going to go into more details, and that one is almost unbelievable. 5 out of 10 states were including costs on their reconciliation tied to the random moment time study that were not allowed. These were, again, they're just not allowable costs, but they came through on the random moment time study and found their way into the final reconciliation. And then last, 10 out of 10 states, which is, if you're a baseball player, that's pretty good batting average, right? 10 out of 10 did not meet federal requirements when they developed the random moment time study methodology. Now, this is, I've got to say, again, they don't say this in the report, but if I work at a state Medicaid agency and I have something to do with school Medicaid, and 5 years ago, here comes an audit report from OIG. I read that, and if it has to do with RMTS, and I have RMTS here in my state, I'm going to check and see if we have the same problems that the state in this audit report has. And I don't even care who the contractors are. If I work with a contractor, I'm going to my contractor and I'm saying, hey, do we have any issues with this? Look at what just happened in this state, or look at what happened in this state 5 years ago. Do we have any of these same kind of issues? These audits went on from 2010 to 2017, so 8 years of audits. And in that time, 10 out of 10 states did not meet the federal requirements when they developed their methodology. That's just crazy. So here are some specific examples, again, just to give you guys an idea of what they found. One state was sending out random moment emails to people on holidays. Okay, we're not in school. We're not treating kids. I don't think it happened often, but I also know that I think they sent out, not that state, but other states have sent out stuff on weekends, Saturday and Sunday, and providers get these emails, and what are you doing Saturday at 11 o'clock in the morning? I was mowing the grass. 4 states were sending out emails for times outside of working hours. So I'd get an email say, Bob, what were you doing Wednesday at 7:30 in the evening? I was watching American Idol, or I was probably eating my Girl Scout cookies if I had any left. 4 states had duplicate providers on their roster. So I turn in my roster and for the random moment time study. Here are the 25 providers. I have one provider on there twice. And a great big huge school district, you might see how that could happen if they had 500 providers. But it happens in all size school districts. And then the last one included providers in their random moment time study who don't provide a reimbursable expense. Okay, and I mentioned this one earlier. Before you implement your RMTS, you have to have it approved. You have to have your plan and your methodology approved. CMS reviews and approves your plan, but you also have to get an approval from something called the Division of Cost Allocation, or DCA. And so CMS might conditionally approve you, but before you can actually put this into practice, DCA has to also approve. And it's kind of like getting your driver's license. you can pass the written test, but you don't have a license until you also pass the driving test. So in this case, or in these cases, First State, they operated their RMTS for 3 years without having the DCA approval. The next one, 7 years. And the last one, 11 years. And they don't say this again in the audit report, but that kind of points out to me that maybe CMS needs a little bit of more internal controls. CMS issues a conditional approval and says, okay, state, here you go. We approve it. Make sure you get that DCA approval. But then after 11 years, CMS has obviously never gone back to see if that state ever got the DCA approval. They've just been processing their Medicaid claims, and it's not until OIG comes through with an audit years later that they figure that out. A couple more examples. In the first one here, the contractor, and they are very specific in calling out that this was an issue with the contractor. They allowed costs for special ed teachers coming through in the pool, even though special ed teachers do not provide a reimbursable cost in that state. In Arizona, my state, where I live today, again, we sent out all those emails and people replied and said, well, I was doing this at 3 o'clock yesterday, or I was doing this at 10:30 in the morning. OIG comes in a couple years later and says, where is the documentation for this? And the contractor had discarded it. Didn't know they had to keep it. Again, don't know if it was they just deleted all the electronic files, if it was done on paper. However, they had no backup for it. Missouri, they listed activity codes on their random moment time study that did not match activities that these providers were actually performing. And the last one is 7 states that had absolutely no documentation to support how they determined their sample size. So again, remember I said we go through all those nerdy statistics and we figure we need to send out 7,100 emails this school year. 3 years later, OIG comes in and says, how did you figure out you needed to send out 7,100? OIG might actually agree that 7,100 is the right number, but how did you figure it out? 7 out of the 10 states could not explain how they came up with that number. They had no notes. They couldn't reconstruct it. They just had no idea how they came up with it. Okay. The end result of all these things, and there's lots more examples that I didn't cover in here. OIG takes a look at all these and they say, there are 2 root causes for all these things. Each one of these things falls into either this bucket that caused it or this bucket that caused it. And here's what those buckets are. What they said was, CMS, you did not develop and distribute guidance telling people how they had to retain their records for these programs. So they got rid of a lot of these records because they didn't know they had to keep it, because you never told them that they had to keep it for a certain amount of time or in a certain, certain format or anything like that. That's the first problem that caused some of these. The second one is that the individual states did not have policies and procedures in place to monitor their school Medicaid programs that would have caught these issues. And again, I'm not going to read all these things to you, but these are the areas they specifically call out, says there's nothing in place to ensure that these things happen correctly. So OIG takes all these findings, they group them in these 2 buckets, and they say, CMS, here's what we're recommending to you. These are the things, this is what we think you need to do to fix these problems. 2 things. First, CMS, you need to instruct the state Medicaid agencies to revise their policies and procedures to monitor their programs in various ways. And again, I won't read all of them to you, but for some basic stuff. Things like the state has to have DCA approval before they can implement their plan. Things like the RMTS has to meet its statistical validity. That the RMTS responses have adequate documentation backing them up. That the random moments that you're polling are times when people are actually working and school is in session. Those kind of things. You need to build, you need to tell state Medicaid agencies to build things in place to make sure that these things happen. And the second thing, CMS, you have to do, we're giving you a choice. You either have to do one of these 2 things. You either have to update and distribute your formal guidance on how to do all this RMTS stuff, or we're recommending you get rid of the RMTS. Interesting. Now, I know that there are probably thousands of people in the school Medicaid world around the country that if somebody came out and said, we're eliminating the RMTS, they'd all say, Yahoo! That would be a cause for sitting down and eating an entire sleeve of Thin Mint Girl Scout cookies at one sitting if they got rid of the RMTS. But those are the recommendations from OIG. Now, here's my very favorite part of OIG audits. When OIG audits a state, they send the state their preliminary report. The state has a chance then to respond to the findings. They send that back, and when OIG publishes the final audit report, they include the state comments. And typically, the OIG report says something like, state, we think these terrible things happen and you owe CMS this much money. And the state usually sends back something that says, thank you very much for the audit. We disagree with all of your findings and we don't think we owe any money back. Now, I'm being a little facetious, but that's a pretty common theme. So in this case, OIG sends their draft to CMS and they say, CMS, here you go. Here's what we found. Here's what we're recommending. Do you have any comments? Here's what CMS said. They said, OIG, we agree with your findings. And a matter of fact, we agree with both of your recommendations that we need to instruct the state Medicaid agencies to revise their policies to monitor their program, and that we need to either update our guidance or eliminate the RMTS. We're going to update our guidance. Okay, now the last time RMTS, which is documented in the Administrative Claiming Guide, was updated formally was in 2003. 16 years ago. And any of you who've been in school Medicaid for more than 5 years have heard every year a rumor that CMS is updating that guide. And maybe they are, but they haven't. I've heard it for 10 years, easy. The word is that they're going to update the guide this year, or they're going to update the guide this year. No, they're going to update the guide this year. And it hasn't happened. Now, OIG is saying, hey, CMS, this is a problem. And CMS is saying, you know, you're right. We're going to update that guide. Okay, what does that mean at the state level? Again, interestingly enough, in the last 4 or 5 months, we've had lots of people from state Medicaid agencies join the Lunchinars. And I hope some of you are there today listening to this. I am thinking of the impacts that I'm going to put up here are impacts that just occurred to me. There may be other impacts that would be good for me to know. So if anybody out there wants to call and give me more information, I would love that. But let's say that at the state Medicaid agency, you get this new guidance from CMS. You get this new set of policies and procedures, or this new direction that you need to establish policies and procedures to monitor your program more closely. It could come today. It could come a year from now. But what is the impact in your agency? Well, you probably have to turn around immediately and figure out how to operationalize that to your school districts. Okay, you're going to get this guidance from CMS. You're going to get this training. You're going to get these this direction. You probably have to turn around and get word out to the school districts as soon as possible. Now, you also probably need to install some new processes to monitor your school Medicaid program. Some of the Medicaid agencies out there might already have processes in place that would have passed any of these 10 audits that OIG did over the last 9 years. But you might not. So you probably have to evaluate that and change some of those things. You probably have to add oversight. You probably have to add controls, maybe some new reports. You probably have to include some new requirements on your contractors that run your program for you. And you know, it's not unusual. I mean, I would think that the majority of states have a contractor that runs their random moment time study for them. Matter of fact, you may have to establish new working relationship with your contractor. You might have specific things in your contract that they're supposed to do. And now with this new guidance, you might need to add more things to that they have to do. And so one of the things that I suggest to state Medicaid agencies is, it might be a year before CMS comes out with all this information. You should be talking to your contractors right now, just making sure that you're both on the same page. Not that there's anything wrong with your state or what's going on in your program, but you're going to get these new requirements. And you're going to have to work together to figure out how to implement that. I think it's better to talk about that stuff right now than it is to wait 6 months from now and just walk in to a meeting and say, oh, contractor, you've got to comply with all these new regulations. Now, some of this stuff could also trickle down to the school district level, right? And I don't think the impact of this will be as big at the individual school district level as it would be at the state Medicaid agency level. But it's not unreasonable to think that you're going to get new guidance, new training documents from your state Medicaid agency. You might get new rules on the retention of supporting documentation. Of course, that apparently has been a problem, that people have gotten rid of documentation they should have kept. You probably get new rules, new detail level on that. And your state Medicaid agency might add more elements to your normal Medicaid audits. Of course, we all know every state Medicaid agency does a regular kind of audit on the Medicaid program for school districts. And it could be, as a matter of fact, it probably is kind of a given that you're going to get more requirements for that. It may not make your Medicaid audit more difficult or more work or something like that, but it could be that you're going to get more requirements in your audit preparation. Okay. So I kind of given you guys a quick overview of what OIG's responsibility is a little bit. We talked about the RMTS sort of at a conceptual level, what the audit report said at a high level, what OIG or what CMS responded with, and what could happen at the school or at the state level. Here are some final thoughts from me. These are just my final thoughts. Nobody gave them to me. I think it's admirable that somebody at OIG stood back and said, looking back at all these 10 audits, holy cow, there is one common theme going through that. I have a feeling that, a lot of people, just like in real life, you work on whatever today's work is. I work on today's work and tomorrow I'm going to work on tomorrow's work. And it's rare sometimes that people step back and look historically, but somebody at OIG did that. And so I applaud them for doing that. I think this is a wake-up call to a couple different groups. The state Medicaid agencies, for sure. They're basically calling out, I think they're putting the state Medicaid agencies on notice. Hey, we, CMS and OIG, have seen the same problem for 10 years, and we're going to address it now, so you better address it now. Not that it's all your fault that it wasn't addressed in the past. Matter of fact, here in the audit report, we blame CMS for some of this stuff. But moving forward, you guys are on notice for this. And the next one is the contractors. And I mentioned this before. It's very rare that OIG even names a contractor. But in this special audit report, they go back 10 years and name every contractor. I think OIG and CMS, they recognize that the state agencies rely on those contractors to be experts and to implement parts of the school Medicaid program that maybe the state agency doesn't have that much familiarity with, right? It wasn't until recently that they started naming these contractors, and this report names them all. Personally, I think this is a wake-up call for any contractor out there who provides these kind of services. Whether your name's on that list of historical audits or not, this, to me, is OIG and CMS saying, you guys better get your act together. You guys better make sure that there are controls in place and that your processes are in place and your documentation and all that kind of stuff. Last one for me is there a better way than the RMTS? What if they had gotten rid of it? That was one of the recommendations, or one of the options, I guess. What if they had gotten rid of it? Well, a couple things. RMTS has so many moving parts. There are all the emails. Of course, there's all the statistics and stuff up front. There's all the formulas. There are people putting in free text answers and other people trying to interpret what those free text answers mean. And all that stuff, all those moving parts, to me, there's a real opportunity to have problems. The more moving parts you have, the more places you could have a problem. And you just have to have a problem in one little area, and the whole RMTS could be marked as invalid. It's also very expensive for states, because states, they work with contractors who have people who are sitting there coding stuff. They have software products that they send out, or software products that manage all those emails and all the reports that go out. So is there a better way? And one of the things that I thought to mention today is for state agencies who might be listening to look at the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a cost reconciliation state, but they do not include the random moment time study, at least on their school-based services. Remember, random moment time study is to come up with one number, boom, 60%. On average, all of our providers spend 60% of their time providing direct service. In New Hampshire, they actually do a direct cost allocation based on every provider's direct cost. So this provider's direct costs are $60,000, salary and benefits and everything. This provider's costs are $50,000. So we have a special rate for provider A and a different rate for provider B. And what that means is in New Hampshire, they have a special rate for each provider, and they reimburse at that rate. They don't do a statewide average and random moment time study and all the emails and all that stuff. And there probably are audit issues that you could find with that direct allocation that New Hampshire uses, but I don't think with my experience that they're going to be nearly as prevalent or as error prone as the random moment time study. So if there's states out there who are frustrated maybe with their random moment time study, maybe you should get with the folks in New Hampshire and kind of see how they do stuff. I think it's a really good system, and I think lots of people that I've talked to think it is too. Here's my contact information again. If anybody has questions, you want to talk about this or anything else in school Medicaid, I really enjoy and I encourage discussions like that, even if it's a heated debate. You land on a different side of an argument that I do. Those are good, and they really help educate me. I appreciate everybody attending. Thanks very much, everybody.